Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm the Campaign Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. Today's session is going to be about how to make PowerPoint more engaging with games. If you've joined us today, then you're probably a PowerPoint user and you're looking at making those PowerPoints a little bit better and a little more engaging, and we're going to show you how to do that with games. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions using the questions panel. It looks like some of you have already found that in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you'd like a recording of this session, have no fear. We will be recording it and emailing it out to everybody who has registered. So you'll receive this later in the day. We'll also probably be posting this on our blog, so you can check that out at blog.elearningbrothers.com at any time in the future. All right, so to talk to us today, we have Stephen Baer, Head of Creative at the Game Agency, and Calvin Cummings, one of our PowerPoint developers at the eLearning Brothers today. Thanks both of you for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you, Stephen.
Super. For today, we're going to talk about a few different things. Certainly talking about game-based training, the goals overall, because when we think about using games, we want to think about why you're using games, and certainly along the lines of thinking about why is identifying the right one. So we'll talk about what goals go behind games for your PowerPoints, or certainly for your training overall, identifying the right one, certainly how to create games in PowerPoint, how to take games that may be from elsewhere, specifically HTML games, and putting them into PowerPoint. And then certainly the last thing is looking at the ROI, looking at the data, and really starting to identify the return on investment for the games you built. Please pop any questions along the way, and we'll answer as we go. So the first thing is certainly just everyone who I believe is on this webinar probably already knows this, but talking about the benefit of games. And so we always start with just kind of the why games. And if you think about training overall, you think about the fact that there's lots of passive learning activities, and there's certainly lots of active learning activities. Games certainly fall into that active category, right? At the end of the day, it's less of a monologue and more of a dialogue. You have someone engaging with your content, and as a result, you're going to get them to really retain that information on a much deeper level. And so then you think to yourself, okay, well, there are so many different types of games that are out there. First thing you want to do is you want to map the right game to your ultimate performance objective, right? So that might be, I want to improve my employees' decision-making skills, or I want to improve sequencing or visualization, or their ability to describe things, or certainly we see probably more often than not is their ability to recall specific information. So the first thing you want to do is think about what is that performance objective that you have and map to that. The next thing you want to think about is, what do you want that experience to be, right? Is that a collaborative experience? Is that a competitive experience? Thinking about, and by the way, it could be both, right? You can certainly have teams working together against one another. It can be certainly in a room, it could be in an e-learning format, and this certainly plays into what that ultimate game experience is going to be. The next thing you want to think about is how you plan on using these. So, right, so we just talked about instructor-led, so in that room, and how do you bring that room to life? Alternatively is, how do you take your e-learning and potentially punch some additional activities or engagement into it? So once you've taken all those things, you can certainly identify the right types of games out there. What I'm showing here is a bunch of games from the Training Arcade, which is a platform that the Game Agency's made, and we distribute in collaboration with the eLearning Brothers. But you'll see across the board here a whole bunch of games. We're going to go into a bunch of these against those different performance objectives, but anywhere from your traditional Jeopardy or training game, your scenarios, which is more about soft skills, your sorting games, your game year games, and we'll go into each of these, but a lot of these map to different types of performance objectives. So let's go through those one at a time. So the first one is, just pop this guy to play while I'm talking about it. The first one is, we'll take that off. Okay, the first one is a branching dialogue game, right? So what you see here is a scenarios game where you can put different characters into different situations. You can tell a story that hopefully people are going to relate to. You can create different quests, certainly different types of challenges, different characters. Ultimately, the decisions that someone's going to make is going to take them down one branch or another. People can certainly course correct over time. What's really nice about really all the games we're going to talk about today is that you can either pop existing content right into it. Certainly we use a lot of the e-learning brothers templates, or you can build really custom stuff for your story or for your game. What you see here is an example of very custom animations, characters, environments that we've built over at the game agency. But ultimately, what this game here is showing is different decision-making skills. And applying those decision-making skills right within your learning is a great way to have someone try something, see what works, see what fails, and ultimately give them the opportunity to master that information. Okay, moving on. The next game I'm showing you is a sequencing game. So this is a sorting game. Really easy to think about. How do we identify the right category? How do we identify the right order that something should be in? This is great for anything from sales training, thinking about the different process that you want to do, or product training, what categories does something fall into, or even we've seen a lot of quick service restaurants build out ingredient maps and start to identify what goes into each of their meals and in what order does it need to be prepared. Okay. The next one is visualizing, right? So this is, this happens to be a game called Recall, but thinking about playing videos, playing images, having someone look at that, retain that information. If they don't remember what they saw, going back for hints, almost like a little investigation game, if you will, right? But what's nice about this is that it really requires someone to look at something, take in that visual, and make some key decisions about it. The next one. Description game. So what I'm showing you here is a game called Scramble. There's lots of word games out there like this. This one happens to be kind of like Wheel of Fortune without the wheel. But what's really nice about these description games is that they challenge the player to really think through the concept on a much deeper level. It makes them understand it enough that they can spell it out, that they can really articulate it themselves. And if they're able to do that, they understand it sufficiently. The last one I want to show you is just Recall. And Recall games come in all shapes and sizes. I'm showing you a bunch of examples here. Jeopardy, trivia, jump, match, all with different recall questions woven throughout. What's really nice about this is that you can take anywhere from game shows or popular game mechanics. You can take multiple choice, multi-select, image match, text input, all about getting someone to recall some key information that you've taught them. And this is certainly the best way to understand whether they understand it or not. Okay, what do all these games have in common? They have a few things in common. First of all, they are all safe zones to play, to explore, to practice, to fail, and as I was saying earlier, to really master the skills. And the really amazing thing is that when someone feels comfortable playing around with the content, once again, whether it's in an e-learning environment or a classroom environment, one, the more you're going to get them to engage with the material, and two, the more you're going to get them to master the material. But beyond just being that type of environment, they all have three things in common. They all have rules, they have strategies, and they have goals. And when you think about building a game, whether it's any of those types of games or the ones we're going to show you momentarily that you can build in PowerPoint, what's really great about these is that they all have rules, strategies, and goals. So rules, 3 strikes, you're out, 3 outs, and the inning's over, 9 innings and the game is done. Strategies, you might want to try a curveball or a bunt or steal. And goal is to get the most runs at the end of the game, right? But if you map to each of those things, someone will understand not only what they need to do, figure out the best way to do it, and they're going to accomplish it at the end of the day. Okay, so we're going to go through a bunch of games. I'm going to pass this over to Calvin to walk you through some games as I'm showing you some HTML games. Now we're going to show you some PowerPoint games, and then we'll talk about how you can either build them in PowerPoint or how you can embed them into PowerPoint. Calvin, I'll drive this for you while you talk it through, if that sounds good.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so yeah, so like Andrew said at the beginning, I'm a developer, and I just wanted to go through a couple of these games and kind of describe what it would take and what benefits they have and what kind of development it would take to have these games work. And so the first game we have is this arcade one called Maze Master. So moving on to that one, Stephen, if you can go to that next slide. Here are just a few screenshots that kind of give you an idea of what the game is like. And so the premise of this game in particular is that the player controls an explorer who's navigating their way through this maze. The character starts at one end, they move to an intersection, and at this intersection, the player is presented with a question. Now, if they answer that question incorrectly, then the character will go the wrong way, reach a dead end, and the player will have to try again. Will have to try answering the question correctly. And if they answer the question correctly, then the character moves on to the next intersection where the player is presented with the next question. And with this game, this one is actually one that we have available in our template library that is super easy to implement and put in, because all it is a bunch of slides that link to each other depending on what answers the learner is giving. There's no complicated coding or anything like that. It's very simple. If you were to have this template to customize it, would only take an hour or two, because all you would really be doing is replacing the text of the questions and replacing the text of the answers and the feedback. And the feedback, if you wanted to customize that, it would be an opportunity to help the learner either reinforce the answers that they gave that were correct, or to kind of help them guide them towards the correct answer if they answered it wrong. And in that way, you're able to kind of reinforce and help the learner recall the information that they've learned throughout the course, or maybe to gather information on how their mastery of the course content. And so, to build this from scratch would take several more hours, because you'd have to link all the slides together. You'd have to design and animate the character moving throughout the maze. But using the template, it's much simpler to just be able to replace text and have it put directly into the course.
Real quick question on this one, Calvin.
Yeah.
Yep. So you said, hey, there's Stephen's family. So you said that to build this from scratch would take a considerable amount of time, and that editing it would be very, very easy. If you're brand new to PowerPoint and you're still wanting to use this template, how long would it take to edit this and figure out the click-throughs and things like that?
It would take, I'd say I'd give it a maximum of 4 hours, because you just have each of these buttons that you see is simply a link to a different slide in the PowerPoint. And there's a for each question.
They're not going to say wrong, correct, is what you're saying.
Right. That's right. Yeah, those will be replaced with the actual answers the actual answer options that you want to have in there.
Okay, there are also, and I know you still have stuff to talk about on this slide as well, but there's quite a few people saying that their primary use of PowerPoint is that they are moving from PowerPoint into something else like Storyline or Lectora or Captivate, and not just finishing their product in PowerPoint. Maybe both of you gentlemen can help me expand here. So what we're talking about today is figuring out how to make your PowerPoint itself, if your PowerPoint is your final iteration, how to make your PowerPoints more engaging. Is that right, or are we trying to expand beyond there today?
That's exactly right. While we can certainly talk about implementing games right into Storyline or Captivate or Lectora, which is really easy to do as well, also with the Training Arcade or other HTML games, today's purposes, we think about the fact that there are still so many presentations done every day, especially for ILT, using PowerPoint. And one of the questions we get often is, how do I bring those to life? How do I change that from a monologue into an interactive experience? And that's what we wanted to show today. Okay,
excellent. So, sorry, Calvin, I'm totally interrupting you and taking up your time here, but there's some concerns, and I'm going to move you guys over here, so I'm looking forward. I think, and this has come up in a couple different ways, but when PowerPoint is your primary authoring tool, Is your primary way not just ILT, or how can you package it and deliver it for someone else to run through that PowerPoint as a training tool? For example, this game looks like it would be much better if it was just an individual sitting there and clicking through it. And how would you package that and send that out as opposed to putting it in front of a group?
Calvin, do you want to address it, or you would like me to? I have certain thoughts, but I don't want to step on you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we often see, certainly when it comes to gameplay, is yes, this is actually, this one can be, in my opinion, done just as effectively as an individual single player experience or as a group play. The fantastic thing about using games, certainly in ILT environments, is it starts to create dialogue. You can have your whole group basically going through a quest together, right? This happens to be somewhat of a linear experience, right? You have some branches and they're gonna have some repercussions based on your decisions, but it's not like you can have different groups doing different things at different times. And actually all three of the examples we're gonna show you, or Calvin's gonna show you in PowerPoint, are just that, right? But it fosters conversation in the classroom, right? And yes, it's actually kind of cool to go not only down the right path, but just as much go down the wrong path and show your learners what the consequences of that decision are. So I think it's great for not only continuing the education, but also pulling people into the experience and having them participate on a deeper level and make some decisions and see what their decisions lead to.
Excellent. And there's also a couple other questions here. And I think a lot of the people in the audience are so much bigger scope than what we might be talking about today. How does this fit into an LMS? How does this work into PowerPoint? Why wouldn't you use Storyline to build this same kind of thing? If a lot of people only have PowerPoint, or a lot of people think that PowerPoint is good enough, and that may be the case, or it covers what you need. And that's why we're talking about how you can make your PowerPoint just take it up to the next level. And with that, I'll shut my mouth and let you keep talking, Kevin. Or Calvin. Right. Kevin? Who the heck is Kevin?
That's all right. That's all right. Okay, so moving on to the next game, I'd like to talk about that one for a sec. So this one has a similar similar premise to the Maze Master game, but this one is presented in a different format and has a bit more customization. In this one, it's presented in a kind of sports game, baseball format, where as the learner answers questions correctly, they're able to score points. And because this game is a point-based system, the learner might feel more engaged and more and have more of a motivation to perhaps retry and to try again to score a higher amount of points. This game also has more customization because you can because it's competitive between teams, and you can also determine how long the game lasts with how many innings there are, and the names of the teams and such. And so in this way, you're able to kind of give the learner a more customizable experience. There's also a higher level of difficulty because you're able to change and determine the difficulty that each question is. So for example, you might have a really simple question that scores that gives the player a very low score, but much harder, more difficult questions that would give the player a higher score, a higher number of points. And so because of that, this game would take a lot more time to develop than the Maze Master game, as well, because it would also be using macros. And macros are basically strings of code that tell PowerPoint how to do things that are a lot more customizable than just using shapes and things like that. So this game is more complex. This kind of game is more complex, but it would allow for a bit more varied interaction from the player. And then I guess moving on to that last game.
Hey, Calvin, before you do, can I just add one thing to this?
Yes. Yeah.
What I think is great about these two games, or all three of them, is each one of them lends itself, especially in an ILT environment, or quite honestly, it's an extension of any e-learning, a themed concept, right? So we've seen, a sales meeting that is all based around sports analogies and then building in tournaments, if you will, using these types of games, right? This is a great example where you can go district by district or department against department and really create a level of competition with something as simple as PowerPoint. And I think that's really important to think about. How do you take a relatively simple tool like PowerPoint and push the limits on what it can do, and really drive a level of interaction and excitement within a classroom? So I think this is a really effective example and something, certainly a sport, baseball, that most people can get their heads around very, very quickly. I'll go forward. I just wanted to add that in, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yep. So this last game is one that's called Escape the Office. And if you've ever heard of those kind of escape room games, they have a lot of video games, and they even have many places now where you can go and do these games where basically you're trapped in some kind of room or area, and you're trying to find clues by examining every little inch of space. And so something that you can actually do in PowerPoint is create one of these games where the player is exploring an office space. And if you were to do this for your company, you'd want it to look like your own office space at your company. And in this kind of demo in particular, the player is navigating through this office, finding these clues to unlock the pin pad to the door. And they explore, they look at desks, they look at Post-it notes, they look at the fridge to try to find these things that will give them hints as to what the pin pad code is. And so for this one, you would, the most significant amount of time, I think, would just be spent designing the illustrations for the office space, because the arrows and buttons and things would just navigate to different slides of different areas of the office. And in that way, you'd be able to help the learner kind of find things and be more aware of the surroundings, and to find ways to kind of pay attention to what's going on, and to find those clues that will help them make their way through the activity.
Now, this example happens to be a quick tech demo that was put together, but we've seen folks take full panoramic pictures of their offices, and as Calvin was saying earlier, layer in very, very realistic visuals that people can associate with, certainly, and take pictures of different nooks and crannies of their offices to make it very, very specific to something that people can relate to. But the nice thing is that this example happens to be showing a lot of stock art that was just purchased on Shutterstock, where certainly a lot of art like this is available right in the eLearning Brother templates. So it's easy to grab existing assets and pop them right in, or certainly create something that's custom from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, so those are just kind of the three examples of games that I just wanted to talk about a little bit from a developer side. But yeah, I hope that's kind of given you some ideas and gotten your maybe brainstorming or ideas jogging of what games can do for you in PowerPoint.
There is, I have a couple more questions for both of you, but they focus on what Calvin has talked about. So do these games, if you were to build them, or let's just say the maze game, let's say you download that, you build out the template and you send it out, would it work in read-only mode, or do you have to have some sort of editing rights in order to work these games, these built-in PowerPoint games?
Mm-hmm. For the Maze Master game, you would need editing capabilities, because you'd have to change the you'd have to be able to change the text of the questions and answers and things like that.
So editing it, you would have to be able to get out of read-only. But if you were sending it out to your audience, could they still view it in read-only?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. And then about sharing these out and posting them, can you host a PowerPoint on an LMS or something like SharePoint Online?
It depends on the LMS, but certainly most LMSs allow you to upload PowerPoints for presentation mode, and all these examples would work just fine. Okay,
and then the last question that we'll take at this point before we move on, that brain ball example, the baseball one with the Despicable Me characters and all that, If you were going to use this, you obviously wouldn't want to use DreamWorks characters. You'd want to throw in something else.
Right.
But there's someone that says the rules of this game leverage the rules of baseball. If I wanted to change those rules to something like soccer, how can I still make that work? And do I need to remember? This goes back to that question or the topic you had earlier, Stephen, where you look at the rules of the game and how can I apply those to this online game. Baseball, I feel like, works really well because you've got that 3 strikes rule. There's a level of complexity in the scoring and the running and things like that. And I'm no soccer expert, but I feel like there's not necessarily a 3 strikes rule. There's not as much complexity in the technicalities of that would translate well over into an online game. So as we're trying to figure out how to build our own games, what are other things that we need to consider when it comes to rules and the structure of those games?
Calvin, you want to address that, or do you want me to? Either way.
I can give just a little bit of personal input. I think something you might want to consider is whether you want it to be timed or not, because just off the top of my head, thinking of how a soccer game could work, you could because soccer games are timed. If you wanted to put a time limit on them, you could do that. You could have kind of different players on the field, and as you answer questions correctly, the ball gets passed to one of your team's players further down the field, and as you answer questions incorrectly, the other team will intercept it and pass it towards the other goal. And so just kind of thinking off the top of my head, it would kind of be more similar almost to that Maze Master game where you advance with correctly answered questions, and incorrectly answered questions kind of set you back a bit. And it could all be put in the context of a time limit where you're trying to score as many points in the time limit as possible. But Stephen, if you have any other input, yeah.
No, I think those are great examples. I would just say, much like a wrong answer or a correct answer rather resulting in a goal, you may also want to think about, a wrong answer resulting in, the other team getting the ball. Or there's lots of different ways I think that you can weave in the nuances of things that happen throughout really any sport into these games. And the nice thing is that the developer behind this game has developed a handful of sports-related games, and so I think there's a bunch of different ways you can go.
Yeah, some of the examples here, there's the yellow card, red card, a penalty kick. There's all kinds of things that you can add and leverage. All right,
Absolutely.
I'll shush now.
So the next thing I'm going to talk about, so we certainly gave a bunch of examples of games that you can build in PowerPoint. We showed a bunch of examples of HTML games out there. And the next thing we want to show is, okay, well, if you're not building them in PowerPoint, but you want them in PowerPoint, specifically showing an example of what you can do with the training arcade, but you could do this really with any HTML content. We're going to talk a little bit about a tool called Live Slides. And if you're not familiar with Live Slides, I would check it out. I think it's a great tool. You just basically go to liveslides.com and you can download it very easily. And after installing it, you're going to see basically a little icon that shows up in PowerPoint, or if you're using a Mac, you need to search for it in your applications folder. But once you've done so, you basically create a new link. You pop the URL right in. So in the case of the training arcade, you just pop the URL for the game that you've built in, and then a few things are going to happen. It will insert it right in, and you'll see in the preview slide, you'll see that black slide. And when you go into presentation mode, you'll see the game immediately. It's really, really easy. And what's nice is it's a seamless experience in that you can be presenting all your slides, you can move on to the next slide, move right into gameplay, and you're going to see something that you can engage everybody in without having to leave and go to a separate URL. So it makes it a really seamless presentation. One thing, we'll post these instructions, but it literally, in 30 seconds or less, if you have HTML content, game content, you can plug it right into your PowerPoint, and it makes your PowerPoint a lot more engaging, both for ILT or for e-learning purposes. The last thing I want to talk about, though, is that there's lots of examples of HTML5 games out there. And there are lots of examples of great games that you can build in PowerPoint. One thing that they certainly both have in common is that they take your learning from a very passive experience, potentially, where you're taking in the content but not necessarily engaging with it, to a very active experience. So that's great, right? Because no matter what, that's going to result in a lot more retention of the information. The more people get their hands on things, the more they're practicing it, the more they're going to retain. The one thing, though, that is a difference between the games that you might build in PowerPoint and the ones that you might use that are web-based is the data. You're going to get a lot more data if you really look at the web-based games. You're going to understand how many users there are, how many sessions they're playing, certainly what they're answering correctly or incorrectly, certainly their behavioral trends when it comes to those soft skill games. What's really nice is that you can take this data real time and you can apply it to your trainings, whether that is in the classroom right then and there and say, hey, I noticed only 30% of you understood this concept, or you guys went down this path, let's talk about that. Or you can send it out as a pre-test to understand what people know before you create your content. I think all that's critical, because the more you have that data, the more you can implement it in, one, making sure that your employees understand something a little bit better, and two, augmenting your training to make sure that you're hitting on nuances where there are learning gaps. So that is, in my mind, just as critical as building a compelling user experience, is understanding how people are engaging with it, what they know and what they don't. So Andrew, I'm going to pass it back over to you. Happy to answer other questions, but that's our dog and pony show certainly for today. It's as far as content and ideas and how-tos, if you will.
Excellent, thank you so much. So just to recap, the things we talked about today is why PowerPoint, or why games in general, are good. Two, how when you'd want to use different games to, whether it's to be a teaching tool or a learning check or all of these other options, ways to use the games. And then we showed you several different types of games. So the ones that Calvin showed you were the ones that were built natively inside of PowerPoint. And in order for those to work, you really just have to make sure your learners have access to the PowerPoint, even if it's just an edit only. There's been a couple more questions about that publish. What if I'm just sending a link to it and they can't edit it? Yes, those will still work. If they're built in PowerPoint, as long as they can launch it into presenter mode, then they'll be able to go through your slides and your game or whatever else you build into it. Then the other part that we showed you is these HTML games, and that's what Stephen over at the game agency and his team has been building. They've got all these cool games that meet all of these different requirements, but they are HTML games, so it's important that you know how to import those. Anything that we need to know about when we're exporting or packaging a PowerPoint for an LMS or something like that, and you've embedded an HTML game into it?
If that's a question, the answer is once it's embedded in, you can upload it right into any LMS or any other environment, and it should be able to stick within your PowerPoint. So there should be no issues. It's really a seamless user experience.
Sure, and of course your learner needs to be able to have access to the internet.
Sure.
And to be able to link out to that.
In the case of the training arcade games, and not if you're building them right in PowerPoint, but yeah, exactly.
Sure. Okay. There is a couple more questions that are just popping up. Training arcade. This isn't necessarily inside the scope, but training arcade games work for PowerPoint, yes, but do they also work in Storyline, Lectora, Captivate, Domino, Docebo?
They sure do. So they're all SCORM compliant, and they also can be inserted as web objects or embed codes, so they can go right up into your LMS on their own. They can pop into any of your rapid authoring tools, or if you've built them and you just want them to sit right on your website, you can use the embed code and put them right there. They also all have single sign-on, so that as long as someone's signed into your platform, they can pop right through and the data can transfer. And they really work pretty seamlessly. The last thing is that they're all built right now, I think, with 16 different languages. So if you can build it into multiple languages at once. So if you have learners in different markets and you want to make that available, we see a lot of clients doing that as well.
Sure. Okay, excellent. So what you're seeing here on the screen where it says try it yourself for free, and then the training arcade. So those are for those HTML games. You can grab a free trial of those at elearningbrothers.com. If you want to know more about them before you really dive into them or even get a free trial, you can send us an email at info@elearningbrothers.com or just see what we've got to say on the elearningbrothers.com site. You can also give us a call directly at 801-796-2767, and we're happy to show you the training arcade, give you a demo of each of the games individually if that's what you'd like to see. The Maze game, Maze Master, I think is what it was called, not Maze Runner, that's for sure, not Maze Runner, Maze Master. That game is also available in the eLearning Brothers template library. It is a different library, it's not part of the training arcade, but it's part of the template library that has loads of PowerPoint templates. They've got graphics, they've got graphics. My mind just went blank. Everything that you need for PowerPoint. We've got full templates for entire decks and, of course, the individual games and things like that, individual images. We also have stuff for not PowerPoint, Storyline, Captivate, Lectora, and the other tools. So that is all included and all a part of that. And you can also just give us a call, 801-796-2767 to see more of what we've got there. Thank you, Calvin. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for checking this out. This has been a little bit shorter. Hopefully you guys can appreciate the shorter sessions in the hour and that you got what you needed out of it. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Take care all.